Well, I just want to start today with just saying how fantastic it is to have you part of what we do here. We really value being connected to you. And so I know when we get together in 2 weeks' time, we can all interact. But some of you, because you're at a distance, like any time, feel free to text, to ring, to communicate any way you can, because we want to know your stories. We want to know what's happening in your life. And I'm going to share this morning a little bit of what's been happening in someone's life in Tasmania. So we'll get to that, but I just want to start with just praying. Lord, I thank you for this morning, and just help me to communicate something that will be an encouragement and help to those that are listening and watching. Back in England in 1840, a guy called Henry Cole was very instrumental in setting up what we now know as the post office. But he did more than that. He was the first person to create a Christmas card commercially, and he sold them for 1 shilling. Now, Christmas cards don't play today the role they did back then, or even historically in the years since. The Christmas card has been really powerful in the traditions that people have experienced at Christmas time. This year, I got one actual Christmas card, and that was from Auntie Lily in Brisbane. I think she might have made it herself. It was handcrafted, and it was really precious and significant, right? But we don't see much of Christmas cards now, like maybe 30 years ago. And I can remember seeing Christmas cards growing up, and they would have on them maybe something nice, encouraging. Sometimes they would have on the front of them verses out of the Bible. And I can remember seeing Christmas cards with these words on it, and it would say, "Peace on earth." And it would have a picture of angels appearing to the shepherds and sort of presenting the good news that Jesus had just been born. And that is a direct quote from the King James Bible, "Peace on earth." And it comes, and the full part of that verse says, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men." But there hasn't been peace on our earth in 2,000 years since that was sung by the angels when it was announced about the birth of Jesus. And it sounds good on a Christmas card, but it's not reality. It's a declaration that appears not to be true. My granddad was in the second wave of young Aussie soldiers to land on the shores of Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915. And by the time the sun went down that day, 2,000 young Anzacs were either killed or wounded. It was meant to be the war to end wars. And following World War I was World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War. And since that war to end wars, there's been 100 million people have died. So what Luke was saying, did he get it wrong? Are we misunderstanding what Luke actually meant by the word peace? Now, I've looked it up. I've looked up what the Greek word that Luke uses, the word peace, what it means. And it means exactly what you'd expect it to mean. It's a quietness, it's a rest, it's a peace, it's a resetting of oneness and unity. And yet, that has not been what our world has experienced across nations, across people groups. The English translation of the Bible is incredibly accurate. It really is. But our modern translation techniques, and even the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, and they go right back to, they can be traced back, the accuracy of the Bible back to AD 70 and even beyond that. All that has helped to just prove and show how accurate the Bible is, but it's also helped refine the accuracies. And so the King James Bible was first translated in 1611, and they didn't have what we have today. And now we have what we have today. It's been discovered that the people that translated the King James Bible, they got that particular verse a little bit wrong. And it's been corrected in the NIV and in all the modern translations since. And here's what Luke really wrote. And he wrote this: "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace, on whom his favour rests." Other translations say, "in whom he is pleased." Others will say, "peace among the people who please God." It's a declaration of peace with conditions. See, the old covenant was a covenant between one God and one nation. And it was between God and the nation of Israel. But this new covenant that Jesus came to establish, it's so different because it's between God and an individual in any nation, between you and God. Now, I have a friend, Jeffrey, in Tasmania, and he's part of Red Gum. He's part of our Red Gum community now, but a year ago, his life was a mess. He was unable to sleep at night time. He'd tend to sleep through the day. He was clinically depressed. He was disconnected relationally from the people in his life that were the most precious and important people to him. And in this last 12 months, there's been a life transformation take place within Jeffrey. And he'll talk to me and he'll tell me how that he has God's peace within him now. And it's so different. He said to me, he used to pull people down, but now he builds them up. When he walks into Bunnings, the staff love to see him because of the smile on his face, because of what he brings. So how is God's favour resting on Jeffrey? How is he experiencing God's peace? Well, for Jeffrey, it's very simple. He's trusting God. He's trusting God in every area of his life. But see, there's more to the peace story than just trusting God. Because even though we're the ones that position ourselves to experience God's favour, it's still a gift. It's a gift. Jesus put it this way. He says, "I'm leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give is a gift that the world can't give it to you. So don't be troubled." He's reassuring, don't be fearful because I have this gift for you. Now, there are two things about peace. The first is that it doesn't mean the absence of conflict. You can experience God's peace when things are still not going as you would like them to. It's not dependent upon the circumstances. And the second thing about this sort of peace, it is not like a really nice coffee that you sit down and just consume by yourself. It's much more like a pot of coffee that we get to experience and we share with others. It's something that God does within us that's meant to be able to flow over to other people. Now, what God has begun in Jeffrey's life, it's now starting to flow over to the relationships in his life that were disconnected. 4 years ago, his youngest son walked out the door, and Jeffrey has not heard from him or seen him in 4 years. But just before Christmas, a few days before Christmas, his youngest son and his girlfriend turned up, and they stayed for an hour and a half. And since then, they've been back numerous times, and that relationship that was so unhealthy that there was no communication, there's health. There's a restoration taking place. And it began first in Jeffrey, and now it's flowing over into his family. Paul in Romans wrote these words in chapter 12. He says, "If it is possible," which means that at times it's not possible, but if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, Paul wrote those words in an environment of never-ending opposition, of relational conflict. But he doesn't say, as long as you can see that the other person, he doesn't say, as long as the other person sees what they've done is wrong, live at peace with them. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, as long as the other person is sorry, or they apologise, or that they're a nice person. What he says is, as long as it's up to you. And that is actually, how would I explain it? It's liberating. It's freeing. Because peace relationally in your life and in my life, it's not being prevented by other people. We can step in. We can do something. And it's possible through the choices that we make. Paul's words, as long as it depends on me. It's in our minds, we tend to enlarge the role that other people play, and we minimise our role in relational peace and health in our families, in our workplaces, wherever we're interacting with people. But Paul is showing us that, as crazy as it sounds, it's crazier letting circumstances, letting complicated people steal and rob your peace. If you're hurting through the actions, through the words of what others have done, pain doesn't remain still. Pain always moves. If it's locked up within you, it leaks. It just keeps moving through you, but it doesn't stay within you. And if it's big enough, it will actually translate through you, pass through you to other generations. Feeling angry is different from living angry. Feeling offended is different from living offended. Grief and loss, hurt and offence, if that stays within you, if that stays locked up, if that's not healed, if you're not set free from that, it somehow morphs, it moves into what we'd call resentment, even bitterness. Lisa Turkhurst has written this incredible book. If you can get this book, read it. If you don't read anything else this year, read this book. And Lisa's written this book, and it's called Forgiving What You Can't Forget. And in it, she makes this statement: the stain of bitterness doesn't end on the tips of my fingers. It leaks into every person I touch. And she goes on to say, living in the comfort of peace is so much better than living in the constraints of unforgiveness. When Paul says, if it's possible, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with everyone, he doesn't stop there. He continues, he says, dear friends, never take revenge. See, unforgiveness can feel like you're punishing the other person, but in reality, it just means that you are staying connected to your pain. And Paul is saying, leave that to our righteous God. Let God sort that out. The Message Bible puts it this way: I'll do the judging, says God. I'll take care of it. If your enemy, and that's the person that's hurt you, they might be the person you live with. They might be the person you're relationally disconnected to. But there's someone that you know. And in the Bible here it says, if they're hungry, go to that person, buy them lunch. If they're thirsty, get them a drink. Your generosity, and this is the Message Bible speaking, your generosity will surprise him with goodness. Don't let evil get the best of you. Get the best of evil by doing good. See, God's word is so practical when it comes to peace, experiencing peace relationally. Jesus, he told this really powerful story, and you may have heard it called the story of the prodigal son. But it's not about one son, it's about two sons. And I think a better name to describe this story that Jesus told would be the Father-hearted God. And Jesus begins this story, the opening scene, with these words: a man had 2 sons. And within this story that Jesus tells, Jesus uses approximately 90 words to describe what the younger son was thinking and saying. And he uses roughly 60 words to describe what the older brother, what he's thinking, what he's saying. But in the whole of the story, as Jesus tells the story, not once does Jesus record the father ever speaking to the younger son personally. We see the father's heart towards the younger son. We see his responses. But Jesus doesn't record one word of a conversation between the one that we call the prodigal son and the father. But Jesus records 40 words that the father says directly to the older brother. Why is there such a personal touch in the story to the older brother, to the son that didn't leave home, to the son that didn't waste his inheritance, to the son that didn't split the family up, that didn't walk away, that become relationally disconnected? When that younger son went to his dad and says, I want half my inheritance, do you understand that meant selling half the property, half the family farm, half of all the livestock? That meant that the dad, who was left behind, and the older son, and all their workers and their servants had to live on only half the land they had, and yet they had to support so many more people off just half of what they had. It was the older son that saw his dad's grief. He saw the pain of this relational disconnection that the dad felt as his son just walked out of their lives. It was the older brother that saw the neighbours buy half their land and farm it and put their cattle on it, and the land that the older brother used to farm and play on as a kid, that'd been in the family for generations, it's gone. And it's the father that addresses the hurt within the older son directly. Now, if you've heard the story before, you will think, and I assume you will think, that the younger son spent some of his inheritance on prostitutes. But Jesus, when he told the story, he never said that. The only reason we think that or believe that, if you've heard the story before, is because it's the older son that made that claim. It was the older brother. See, when offence sits within us and it doesn't move away, when it stays inside us, even if that offence is on behalf of other people, it grows, it moves, and it morphs into this resentment and bitterness. And resentment will always enlarge what the person who has wronged you has done. And it was the older brother that enlarged what his younger brother had done. It was the older brother that said he'd spent his money on prostitutes. Jesus never said that. And it was because the older brother was taking the moral high ground. And if you take the high moral ground upon anyone, you'll never forgive them. And he hadn't. And if you are ever going to feel compassion upon someone, you'll forgive them. But if you don't forgive, you'll never feel compassion for their world, see what they're going through. But the father, when he saw the younger son come home, he ran to him, and it says he had compassion on him because he had already forgiven before that son ever walked through the house door for the first time. Whenever Jesus tells a story, it's a really good thing to ask yourself this question: who am I in the story? And in this story, there's only 2 options. You are either the younger son who's hurt people, or you are the older son who's offended by that hurt. I think I've spent a lot of my life being the younger son and causing hurt and pain to others. But in this story, It's really important to understand who we are. Where do we fit in this story? And I just want to read the last little bit of this story to you. And I'm focusing just on the older brother's part. So this is in Luke chapter 15, verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants what was going on. And he told him, "Your brother is back. Your father has killed the fattened calf, and we're celebrating because of his safe return." The older brother was angry, and he wouldn't go in. He does this little dummy spit, right? He's offended. And so his father comes out and he begs him. And the father says to him, the son says to the father, "All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you've told me. And in all that time, you never gave me even a young goat to eat with my friends. Yet when this son of yours," it's like, he's not my brother, it's your son. He says, "When this son of yours comes back after squandering all your money." Now, that's actually true. The younger son did blow all his dad's money. His dad has nothing. And so he says, when he comes back after squandering all your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fatted calf. And this is what the father says. "Look, dear son, you have always stayed with me, and everything I have is yours." And that is so true. We had to celebrate. This is right. The dad's saying, what we're doing is right. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother is dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is now found. The dad's saying, what we're doing is right. And what you're doing, son, is actually wrong. This thing about peace relationally can only happen through stepping through into forgiveness, the process of forgiveness. And it's liberating. It sets us free. And Jeffrey, my friend in Tasmania, sent me a little video this morning, and he sent me a message. And I want to read part of that message to you. Because last night, Jeffrey went out spotlighting with his younger son that he hadn't seen in 4 years. But it wasn't just Jeffrey and his younger son. It was also his older son. Because his older son, for 4 years, has been disconnected to the younger son. And last night, we had a younger son and an older son and a father and a grandson all together. And little Carson turned 7 at midnight. And at midnight, he was asleep in the front of the truck. They woke him up and they sung happy birthday. A whole family who have been disconnected for 4 years are singing happy birthday to this little 7-year-old. And I want to read you just the last words of the message that Jeffrey sent me this morning. He says this: "One of the most precious nights of our lives. Awesome time. All left for God to mend. And he is mending far greater than one can imagine." Like, how good is that, Lex? This is how real this is. It's not theory. Relational peace is possible. And we play a bigger role personally than we understand. And it begins with peace between us and God. And then it flows over into peace relationally with those in our world. It is just this incredible gift that God gives. And it's not something that our culture can give us. It's something that God can give. And forgiveness begins with a willingness. And it enters a partnership with God. Forgiveness is not just something you do. It's something you enter. And you enter on the basis of what Jesus has already done. What he's already achieved on the cross. What he's brought for you and I. So, as we begin this week, I encourage you, ask God, speak to him, a little throwaway prayer that says, God, help restore the relationships in my life. You know where you're struggling. You know who you're struggling with. The person that you don't want to hear their name, the person that you don't really want to bump into down the street or at a family do or something. You know, and God knows, and there are answers. So thank you for being with us this morning.